140 odd kilometres, and beyond that there really was nothing for them to do. And the narrowband people, on the other hand, there were a much smaller number of them, but they were not really bothered about exploring optical paths. They could explore paths that you couldn't see from one end to the other with obstructions on the paths. And so for them, the need to go up into the mountains really disappeared. And indeed, what was the point of going up into mountains? Because what the people with narrowband equipment were doing were exploring paths that couldn't be achieved by optical means and couldn't be achieved by the wideband equipment. This new generation of narrowband equipment was too heavy often and too complex to cart up into the hills anyway. And so for a significant period, portable operating in 10 gigahertz all but died out. But then if we cut forward to the 1990s, the readily available gas FET technology, so you can have strip line, microstrip transverters, and that meant that once again it was possible to use and make really lightweight radio equipment. But curiously enough, all the microwavers by that stage, perhaps they'd all got too old, I don't know, but their interest in going out portable into the hills seemed to have disappeared, although lightweight equipment was again really a possibility. And it's not really until perhaps the last couple of years that people have started now to look again at going into the hills with lightweight microwave gear. And that's what I'm interested in doing, and that's what I've been doing. So a question clearly arises is, does it actually help going up onto a hilltop? Is there any point in going up onto the hills? Well, yes and no, I think, is the answer. If you're up on a hilltop, you're usually clear of local obstructions, and local obstructions at 10 gigahertz can cause you some really severe problems and reduce your range. So the advantage of going up onto a hilltop is that you're clear of local obstructions. And because you're very high up, that means that the diffraction losses, the losses over distant hilltops, are significantly reduced. So your diffraction losses are lower, especially on short paths. So your losses are lower. But in fact, you find that as you go up into the hills, that the predominant mode of propagation actually is tropospheric scatter. And with troposcatter, it doesn't actually make a huge difference when you go up to the top of a hill. So your performance is likely to be just as good from a low hill as from a high hill. So what's the point of going up into the hills? Well, the point of going up into the hills is it's fun. That's the reason I go up into the hills. I go up into the hills because I combine my radio operating with mountaineering. So I actually enjoy both parts of those hobbies. I want to enjoy both parts to the full, and that's why I have very lightweight equipment. Just to show the difference between tropospheric scatter and diffraction losses over a path. Here's a path that runs from Macclesfield, where I live, right over to Dartmoor. So it's a path, a very long path, 300 and something or other kilometres. And you can see that if you calculate, using software, calculate the diffraction loss on that path, that's the loss actually over each of these diffraction edges, which are mountains and hills along the way. The diffraction loss is something like 310 dB on that path. But if you look at the tropospheric scatter loss, the troposcatter loss is something less than 250 dB. So 50 dB less loss through troposcatter. So you start to see that it wouldn't actually make much difference if my aerial was 100 metres above sea level or 150 metres above sea level on that particular path. So from that perspective, you might think that there was potentially no point in going up a high hill. I mentioned that equipment has got very much simpler over the years, and this is, in essence, all one needs to have a very effective portable microwave system these days. You need a transceiver, something like an FT817 is perhaps the perfect sort of transceiver to use for as a microwave IF. And in my case, I use a 432 megs IF out from the FT817. And I have a DB6NT transverter. And the transverter, the DB6NT transverter, is a self-contained unit. It has all of the building blocks that you need for a microwave system, bar an antenna changeover relay. So all that you need to add to your DB6NT transverter to get going is an antenna changeover relay and an antenna system. So it's very, very simple. And I know people spend a lot of time thinking about getting going with microwaves and building up their equipment. I decided to get going in microwaves on a Tuesday. I heard my first signals on the Thursday, and I had my first contact on the following Sunday. So less than a week from thinking about getting going on microwaves to actually going out and having contact. So it doesn't necessarily need to take that long. So if you're interested in this, you know, by next weekend, I look forward to having a chat with you on 10 gigahertz. So a simple system can be built up really quite quickly and easily, and this is pretty much all there is to my current system. I have my FT817, my DB6NT transverter. My current system has a 1 watt amplifier, so that's fed directly from the transmit output from the transverter. There's an antenna changeover relay. This is a 12 volt changeover relay and an aerial system. And the aerial system is very similar to the one that we've seen earlier on this quick start system. You'll see, I'll show it to you in a few minutes. And there are very few connections to make. It really is this simple. You'll be surprised when we look inside the box. You'll see the equipment. It really is this simple. There's a 12 volt line that comes out of the DB6NT transverter on transmit. That simply switches over the changeover relay and powers up the 1 watt amplifier. It really is that simple. There is nothing more to it than that. So it's a very, very simple sort of system. And I've relied on the DB6NT equipment. It's very, very good quality and readily available. But there are other types of equipment. The Down East Microwave make a very good microwave transverter as well for 10 gigahertz. So it's not just the DB6NT stuff that's available. One of the things that you quickly find on 10 gigahertz is that calling CQ from a mountaintop on 10 gigahertz is a rather lonely experience. The chances of there being anybody come back to you is pretty much zero unless you have some way of announcing your presence. There are all sorts of ways of doing that, but one of the most commonly used ones is to use a talkback system. And for microwave here in the UK, we use 2 metre sideband for talkback. So not only do you have to have a 10 gigahertz system, unfortunately you also have to have a 2 metre sideband system with you as well. As we'll see in a minute, fortunately the FT817 can ably do 2 metre sideband as well as being the driver for a 10 gigahertz system. So actually providing VHF Talkback doesn't require that much extra weight, and weight clearly is important if you're going to carry stuff up a mountain. Talkback's used for more than just announcing your presence. It's also used for alignment of aerials, so it's very handy, or it's almost essential in fact, to have some sort of talkback system. It allows you to align your aerials as well as announcing that you're actually on. But if you're not used to using a system with talkback, you need to be just slightly aware of the ethics of talkback, because effectively you've got a completely separate communication system going. And it's quite easy to accidentally pass all of the contact information over the wrong band, so pass it over 2 metres instead of 10 gigahertz. So then, of course, you've not made a proper 10 gigahertz contact. So the ethics of that are that if you're going to make a contact on 10 gigs, you need to have exchanged the call signs. Of course, you already know the call sign of the station you're going to contact because you've spoken to them on 2 metres. And you need to exchange the reports. And curiously enough, the only piece of information that validates the contact appears to be the report. So the signal report mustn't be repeated on the talkback frequency. There's no, if you say you were 3 and 3 on 10 gigahertz, if you then say that on 2 metres, of course, that's invalidated the contact, particularly if you're in a contest situation. So you need to be a little bit careful about that. So all the other stuff is fairly optional, but you just need to be aware of the ethics of using Talkback. What most microwavers use these days for setting up contacts, however, is KST, the ON4 KST system, which is an internet-based system. And this is very good, it's very popular, and it's used by microwavers across Europe and indeed across the world. The difficulty for the lightweight portable operator is that it requires some sort of interface to the internet to be carried with you. And I don't like the idea of carrying a laptop computer with me. I've got enough stuff to carry already. So I don't tend to use ON4 KST, particularly when I'm out on the hills. That being said, you can use it with mobile phones, and I've got my mobile phone programmed up to allow me to give me some basic access to ON4 KST, which is useful just for announcing perhaps that you've arrived on a hilltop. This is the interface for ON4 KST, and this part of the screen shows people chatting, so they can talk to each other just by using their computer keyboards and exchange information, allowing them to align their antennas. It also has a link into the DX cluster, so you can see what's been going on, who's been spotted on the bands, and you can see who's on the system at any particular time, so you can see which microwavers are there. When there are brackets around them, that means the microwave is asleep probably, and you can see, as usual in the UK, most microwavers are in bed, fast asleep, not listening on their radios. Okay, 2 metre talkback. Used to be the only way that talkback was used, and it used to be the primary mode of talkback these days, but there's quite a split these days between people using KST and 2 metres. Quite a lot of people who have KST don't actually have 2 metres with them. So if you're a lightweight backpacker, it's quite difficult then to contact those people. And you get into the situation, as I have done on several occasions, where you need to get someone to relay on 2 metres onto KST that you've arrived on the hilltop and to help you align the aerials. If you think it's difficult aligning the aerials on a separate frequency, you need to try doing it through a second or through a third party who are using the computer as well. That really does make things rather slow, slows everything down, but it is possible. And the other thing that's useful to have is a mobile phone. I've ended up having the telephone numbers of most of the UK's very active microwavers programmed into my mobile phone, so if I'm desperate up on a hilltop for a contact, I can and will occasionally call people up with a view to sort of soliciting a contact to getting somebody actually onto the air. That's often one of the most difficult things. Climbing mountains is actually really very simple. Getting microwavers onto the air sometimes seems to be a lot more complex. What some lightweight operators are doing is carrying a completely separate 2 metre system for their talkback. I know Richard G4ERP, who's very keen lightweight microwaver, he carries a separate 50 watt 2 metre system. That's quite a lot of extra weight to carry, and he prefers to carry a separate system because it allows full duplex. That means that when you're transmitting on your microwave system, so that the station at the distant end can align their antennas. You can talk to them, they can talk back to you on 2 metres and say, oh, I can hear your signal now, just turn the antenna a little bit, and you can peak the antenna up. That's quite useful, but not absolutely necessary. So it's a heavy way of carrying out talkback, but it is probably the best in that it allows full duplex. The way that I do it is by using my FT817 in perhaps a rather sneaky way. If you have an FT817, you'll notice that it has 2 antenna connectors. It has an antenna connector on the front and one on the back. And the antenna connector can be selected for different bands. So because I use 70 centimetre IF on my FT817, I programmed up so that 70 centimetres comes out of the front connector and 2 metres comes out of the back connector. What that means is that by just swapping bands, which is simply pressing one button on the FT817, I can switch instantly between 70 centimetres, which then goes out onto 10 gigs, or 2 metres. So I can switch instantly between those 2 bands. So that means that I don't have a whole load of extra weight to carry, and I can switch between 2 meters and 2 meters and 10 gigahertz very easily. So this is how that works. We've got the FT817. The front connector is connected through to the transverter and out onto 10 gigahertz. And the rear connector is connected out just straight out to the 2 meter antenna. The 2 meter antenna that I carry is just a very lightweight 3-element Yagi, and that mounts on a walking pole, a mast on a walking pole. That is the 2 meter talkback system. So there's nothing more to it than that. It's very, very lightweight. An interesting talk earlier on about aerial types by Gordon, and Gordon talked about a lot of different things that you might take into account when you were planning what sort of aerial to use, but the one thing that he didn't mention, which is absolutely critical for the sort of operating that I do, is the windage of the aerial. And microwavers generally have tended to use, certainly at 10 gigahertz, tend to use dishes. They're the most popular antenna by a long way. The trouble with a dish is that it has a huge surface and huge windage. That's absolutely fine if you have a fairly heavyweight tripod or a fairly sort of fixed system. But if you're working with very, very lightweight equipment on a hilltop, you soon discover that the windage of a dish is a real problem to you. And I have been there and I have done that, and what you find is that dishes very quickly blow over. And there are all sorts of problems using dishes, and so what both myself and Richard G3CWI have come to the conclusion is that the best antenna for this type of lightweight operation is a horn antenna. And in fact both of us now use 20 dB gain horns, and that's about the maximum size that horns are usable at. Any more than 20 dB gain and the horn itself becomes fairly unwieldy. So a 20 dB gain horn is around about the optimum size. Of course, by limiting the gain to 20 dBs, that does limit your system performance, and there's no doubt about that. It's a compromise, and it's a compromise that everybody who goes down this path is going to have to make. The difficulty with dishes, again, actually, curiously enough, there is a difficulty associated with their high gain. Because let's say you decide that you're going to have a lightweight microwave system, and you decide you're going to use a great big dish. So you're going to say have a 35 dB gain dish. The first problem you're going to run into is mounting the dish. So you're going to need a big heavy tripod so that you can actually mount the dish. But once you've got the dish mounted, you've got a very potent 10 gigahertz system. So the next problem that you've got is that you're going to have a similarly potent talkback system. So instead of running 2.5 watts or 5 or 10 watts even for your 2 meter talkback system, you're going to have to run 50 watts, and not only that, you're going to have a much bigger aerial on your talkback system. So if you've got a more powerful 2 meter talkback system, you're going to have a bigger battery. So you see that just that simple choice of going from one aerial type to another with perhaps 10 dB more gain knocks on all the way down the line. So you end up, it's not just the weight of the dish, it's the weight of all the other stuff that you need to match that system properly. So that's why horns, I think, are such a good compromise. So what are the results? What sort of results can you expect, perhaps even with a 200 milliwatt system? Well, Peter mentioned earlier on, I think, that the UK line of sight record between Scotland and Wales was about 245 kilometres. And that was achieved after lots of effort, lots of trips up hills to try and achieve that distance. And in fact, there are very few possible line of sight paths over about 160 kilometres. The very first time that I took out my 200 milliwatt microwave system, my narrowband system, I achieved over 250 kilometres, so more than the UK line of sight record on the very first outing. Just shows just how good narrowband is. It really is very, very effective. And over 160 kilometres is normal. I'm disappointed if I go out up a hill with my system these days and don't achieve at least 160 kilometres. So here's some pictures of some systems. Richard G4ERP, he's a very good engineer and he has access to very nice engineering facilities, and this is what he's done for his microwave system. And you can see he has a single pole which he has guide, he has a 6-element 2-metre beam, and he has his microwave system mounted just 1 metre above the ground. He has a 20 dB horn, you can see that here. There's his 20 dB horn. And he has his transverter mounted into a box which he's made specially, so it's a lightweight box. So here's a typical system. I think this is his 10 gig system. Here's a DB6NT transverter, and this is a 2-watt power amplifier. Power levels are also critically important for this type of operating. The more power you run, of course, the more performance you get out of your system, but the bigger batteries you need. And I've stuck at 1 watt, and the reason I've stuck at 1 watt is that the DB6NT transverter provides 12 volt output on transmit, and it provides sufficient current to drive directly a 1 watt amplifier. And that's why my system is so simple. Richard's system is rather more complex because he has a 2 watt amplifier. So it's a very nice, very nicely made system. Here's my system, less sophisticated, but I think it probably works just as well. It's very similar actually in its capability. This is a system, this particular one I was using a 17 dB gain horn. My transverter is mounted in a box. The box I made out of printed circuit board, very, very simple, nothing very complicated there. I use a separate talkback system, so here's a walking pole. And on top of that is a 1 metre PVC extension, and there's my 3-element beam. So it's a very, very simple system. And I just use 2.5 watts for the talkback. So the transceiver is set for 2.5 watts, which drives the transverter and drives the talkback system. 2.5 watts and a 200 milliwatt microwatts, 200 milliwatt 10 gigahertz system are about equivalent in terms of their performance under most conditions. So those two systems are fairly well matched. The typical ranges that you get, even with simple equipment like that, I think sometimes surprise people. 0 to 100 kilometres is absolutely easy. Very rare that a path in that range fails. Pretty much 95% success rate. I think the only time that paths have failed, I have suspected that there's probably some operator error at the far end or equipment failures. In the range 101 to 200 kilometres, you'd expect paths to work 80% of the time, so almost always working. Only when you get to over 200, between 200 and 250 kilometres, does the rate of failure go up to about 50%. And even up to 300 kilometres, you can expect 1 in 4 tests to work, even with this relatively simple equipment. But interestingly, so far, even though I've made over 100 contacts, I've never managed to get over 300 kilometres, because really to get over 300 kilometres you either need very, very high power systems, or alternatively you need to be up on a hill when there's a lift of some sort. So I've got up to 297 kilometres, so close to 300 kilometres but not quite there yet. The 300 kilometres, of course, is enough to cover a significant swathe of the country. Having looked at those ranges, it's well worthwhile thinking about where it is that microwavers are actually active in the UK. Because let's face it, if you're up in the Shetland Islands and you can only get 300 kilometres, you're not going to have much luck. And even in the Midlands, you're going to struggle sometimes to get into the sort of centres of microwave activity. And indeed, I've been up to the Cheviot, which is a hill in the up here in Northumberland, and found that I didn't make any contacts, simply because there aren't that many microwavers as you go further north in the country. So we're a bit unfortunate. Well, we're just about on the edge, really, of where you can expect to make decent numbers of contacts on the microwave bands. You find actually as you go down into mid-Wales, you start to get into this area where you can work lots of microwavers and you make many more contacts. So you can expect to make a few contacts from hills around here, but as you go north, the number of contacts does tend to dry up. If you just go out on a random Sunday or a random day in the at the weekend to make microwave contacts, you're likely to be disappointed. And microwave activity tends to be over specific periods, and the last Sunday in each month is a microwave activity day. So the last Sunday in each month tends to be the best time to go out, and probably the only days of the month when you could reasonably expect to make contacts without prior arrangements or announcements. And one of the things that I found is that if you're going to be successful, you really do have to work very hard to get people onto the band. And that, for me anyway, people probably get sick of my messages on the microwave reflector, because and the reason that I put so many messages on the microwave reflector is that I know that if I don't tell anybody that I'm going to be on the bands, that I will not make any contacts. And I can't see much point in going out and freezing on a hilltop unless there's at least somebody to talk to. And so if you want to be successful, you need to sign up to the microwave reflector, and you need to tell people at least a day before that you're going to be on. You probably need to post on KST before you go out. And as I said, my fallback is to have the phone number of a few microwave regulars. And these things together almost always guarantee that I make contacts. I don't always make a lot of contacts, it has to be said, but I almost always make contacts. It's very rare for me to have an expedition out onto a hill where I don't make a single contact. So down to the practicalities. You need a rucksack, and the rucksack that I'm currently using is this one. It's a 50-litre rucksack. This is my complete setup. So this has got not only my microwave gear in, this has got the gear that I would need for a typical trip onto the mountains. So it's got waterproofs in the bottom. I've got, I would normally carry a warm hot drink, a bottle of water. I would carry some food. There's spare clothes in here, and all of my microwave setup. And the microwave setup, as you'll see, is relatively small. There's not a huge amount to it. It doesn't take very long on a hilltop to set up. So here's the horn. This is a 20 dB horn made out of printed circuit board. Nothing very complicated about it. There's a few ancillary bits and bobs. It's always at this point when you're on a hilltop that you look in with trepidation, thinking, I wonder what I've forgotten. Let's hope I've not forgotten anything today. That's my FT817. It's in a waterproof bag, an individual waterproof bag, so that it keeps it nice and dry. That's my 10 gig gear. That's it. That's all there is to it. And a lightweight tripod. So to set up on a hilltop, it's as simple as putting the tripod up. The tripod weighs next to nothing. Sorry? Oh, I've got a battery in there. Good point, though. I hope I've got a battery in there. Yep, okay. Yeah, the battery that I use a sealed lead acid battery. It's not the lightest technology available, of course, but it is reliable, easy to charge. I actually use a battery that lasts an hour. I find that kicking around on hilltops, I really want to be on a hilltop for more than an hour. Although I usually go on my own, I'm often with my children, and my kids, they're very patient, my kids actually, but beyond an hour and they do start to complain. And you'd have to carry an awful lot of Kit Kats to last an hour. So, you know, there's a limit to how much you can carry when you've got kids on the hilltop. So this is a box made out of printed circuit board, very, very simple. And to connect the feed up, the horn has been designed so that it just slips onto the front here. go. That's just an SMA connector. So this is very similar to the quick starter setup, very similar to the feed arrangement for the quick starter. And the transceiver, the FT817, acts as a counterweight for the tripod, because tripods will tend to blow over. I carry a guying guying kit for the tripod as well, but the FT817 is simply slung beneath the tripod. So it just sits just here. And you'll notice that there we go. You notice that the lead is all made up and all fastened together for the transverter, so that all the leads are there. Because one of the things that's rather frustrating, as I said earlier, is to get to the hilltop and find that you've missed out a vital lead for something. So the whole thing's all connected together. It's a simple matter of connecting up to the front of the FT817, a lead at the back, grab the battery out. I have remembered the battery. And there we are, we're on. That's it, 10 gigs. So it's ready to go. Just put the microphone in and that's the system. Normally, of course, on a hilltop I would also have the 2-metre system as well. And that, as I said, is simply a walking pole. I would normally use the walking pole when I'm walking up the hill. And the walking pole, that would be guide. This is one piece of pole is a mast extension, which simply plops onto the top of the walking pole, and the other one is a 3-element 2-metre beam. So that simply plugs into the back of the transceiver. So the whole lot is there. There's nothing more to my setup than that. If you want to have a look inside the system, it's very simple. There's really not much to it. Okay, so what sort of success might one get with a system like this? As I said, you can work out to 300 kilometres without too much difficulty, even with a system like this. And although I've only been doing this since February, these are all the hills that I've been up with this particular system, and they've all been successful. So I've had contacts from, actually with one exception. I think there's one hill up there, two that I didn't actually make contact from. The Cheviot, which is a long way away from anywhere, right up on the borders of Northumberland, I did hear a station there, but he couldn't hear me. I was only running my 200 milliwatt system at the time. But you can see, that you can get around, and it's a highly effective way of communicating. Once you've got a lightweight system like this, it opens up all sorts of other possibilities. And a few weeks ago, I participated in one of the microwave contests, and instead of doing it as people would think of normally, I decided I would cycle. So I actually cycled between two hills, and that was very successful as well. And today I've arrived. I've come here by bus and by train. Because it's such a lightweight system, it's really easy. You just sling it in your bag and away you go. You can carry it anywhere. It's very, very simple to take away with you. This is me on the summit of Snowdon. It was so busy on the summit of Snowdon that there wasn't actually room to set up the 2-metre talkback system properly, but that's my complete system. As you can see, it's exactly the same as here. So this was from the summit of Snowdon. So even on bigger mountains, it's quite possible and practical to take this sort of system along. Okay, so that's my backpacking microwave gear. I think I've managed to get it done just within the allotted time. Any questions on that? Yes, David. Sorry? 4.2, that is, I think, roundabout. Yeah, that runs the system comfortably for an hour. Sorry? Oh, yes, the question was what was the capacity of the battery, and it's about 4 ampere-hours, and it runs the system comfortably for an hour.
Do you use the 817's battery?
No. I keep the 817's got a fully charged battery all the time, but I don't actually use it.
Do you have much trouble with drift when you first switch on? How do you get around that?
I don't, because I have well, two things that I've done. The first was when I first got the transverter, it drifted like mad when you switched it on. But after leaving it on for a few weeks at home, it doesn't display that problem anymore. It settles down very quickly. But I also set up in a specific way. So I always set up the 10 gigahertz stuff, and I connect up the transverter and everything so that it's powered up and sorting itself out before I set the 2 meter stuff up. And so by the time I've set the 2 meter stuff up, which only takes a couple of minutes, but by the time I've set the 2 meter stuff up and then solicited a contact on 2 meters, everything's settled down.
Have you measured your total current drain on that battery?
I have done, yes. It's when you're actually transmitting, it's about 1.9 amps.
Yeah, on receive, stands about
On receive, it's about 600 milliamps.
What's the cost of your transverter?
Transverters, I got a special deal on my transverter actually, but they're about £400, I think. Yeah, they are quite expensive.
Actually, Richard, about the modes you use, is it SSB and CW on the sort of longer distance, or?
Yes, I mean I use SSB and CW. Tends to be CW on the longer contacts. It does tend to be CW. Yeah. It's so much more effective. Okay. No more questions. Thank you very much.